Today, I am joined by a bit of an icon of Australian football, Michael Zappone. Thank you for joining me, Michael.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We'll start with a question I like to ask everybody. Just where did your passion and love for football first start?
Well, I think growing up in, in Italo Australian household, and you can't escape the round ball. And I think my grandfather was the one that really got me passionate about the game, and my dad as well, who take me to training as a kid. I grew up in the northern suburbs of Melbourne, in a suburb called Faulkner, and I played for a team called the Faulkner Azzurri, which is named after the Italian national team. So a bit hard not to get involved in the game. All my mates were, a lot of strong Italian community there, so it would be a great place to hang out with your mates and watch the senior team play on a Sunday. So yeah, a great community club, and that's where the passion came from. And I suppose, growing up as a kid, I remember the '82 World Cup. I would have been 8 at the time, and Italy won that World Cup. So they're probably my very earliest memories of watching football on TV and getting up in the middle of the night and having that passion, and that passion is still there till this day.
And we all know you in Australian football as a commentator and a presenter, but on the pitch, how do you rate your skills? Like, what position do you play as well?
I've got one trophy in my cabinet, and that was best and fairest from year 12 when I was at school, and that's about it. So I played as a goalkeeper, and that was probably because I knew I wasn't going to make the first 11 when I was playing at school, if I played on the park. So I transitioned from a very average outfield player to a goalkeeper, and I suppose I played from 15 onwards for the next sort of 20 years in goals. And just someone who loved playing. I was a very ordinary player, but played until I was about 35, and played with my mates, and that was the beauty of it. And I always say that to my kids who play at different clubs at the moment. I've said, the most important thing is to continue your involvement in the game and play with your mates as long as you can, and that's great.
And when you were growing up, who were your sort of football heroes, the ones you would watch on the TV and look up to?
Yeah, it was interesting because we never really had a team that we followed as kids in the National Soccer League. So I suppose if you spoke to kids of Croatian background or of a Greek background, they had the Melbourne Croatia and the South Melbourne Alices and the Heidelberg Uniteds and the Preston Macedonias of the world. So the Italians had Brunswick Juventus as we were growing up, but they weren't a really strong team in the NSL, and they dipped out of the NSL at different stages. So when I grew up, I didn't really have an NSL team to follow. So I probably followed the Italian football more closely growing up, and followed Juventus. So, players like Paolo Rossi and Michel Platini, they're the players that I would really love watching. And I was fortunate enough to see them play at the MCG. They came out here in the 80s, and they played against an Australian side, and they actually came training at Faulkner. They came to our local ground to train because Faulkner was one of the big Italian clubs at the time, as I said earlier. And it was bedlam. It was like the Beatles had arrived in town when the first team of Juventus came to train at this little suburban ground in Faulkner. And you can imagine how crazy that was. So, they're the players I looked up to as a kid. And then I suppose once the A-League kicked off, I started getting involved in the game from a broadcast point of view.
Speaking of sort of that broadcast point of view, what was it like? When was the moment when you decided that this is what you wanted to do for a living, that you wanted to talk about football, you wanted to be a football, sort of reporter, journalist?
I suppose you dream of that as a kid, don't you? Like that's and both my parents were school teachers, and I remember locking myself in my room, pretending I was doing my homework, but what I would be doing would be listening to the soccer or to the AFL, because I grew up in Melbourne, and writing down the scores and writing down the statistics, and I'd have exercise books full of that type of stuff, and run around the backyard and commentate as I was playing by myself because I grew up I had a sister, but she never really wanted to play in the backyard with me. So yeah, those sorts of things I sort of knew as a kid that I always wanted to be around the game, and realised pretty quickly I wasn't going to be a professional footballer. So I suppose the next best thing for me was to be involved in the game from a media point of view. And when I was in year 10, I would have been 15 years of age. I did work experience at a radio station, and I fell in love with the medium, and that was my first sort of entry into the world of media. Was working in radio, and we did some work experience at that station, and ended up doing that for several years. And in the end, fell into sports broadcasting because that same radio station was then commentating the National Soccer League at the time. And I was lucky enough to get involved, pushing buttons initially as a panel operator, and then a producer, and then I made my way to getting on air at one point. So and then from there, I sort of fell in love with media and broadcasting, and was lucky enough to follow the passion for football. And football is a tough game in Australia to be involved in as a full-time journalist or broadcaster. So it's something that I've persevered with, and I've always had to juggle other things because there's never been that consistency of work. Sometimes there's work, and sometimes there's not. So, but I've been lucky enough to be involved in the game now for, showing my grey hairs here, probably 25 years. So yeah, it was at a pretty early age, to answer your question, that I fell in love with the game and knew that that's what I wanted to do.
Now, for football players, one thing they always remember and have a great story about is them making their debut, that moment they first step onto the pitch as a professional footballer. I guess with football journalists, what we can really compare to that is the first player we interviewed. So for you, who was the first player you interviewed, and how do you think that interview went?
Gee, I tell you what, I couldn't tell you who the first player I interviewed was. It was probably when I was 18 years of age, and my first foray into sort of broadcasting was commentating the Victorian Premier League, or the NPL as it's known these days, and that was on a radio station called 3AK, which was a mainstream radio station. So it was great that they had that sort of level of coverage. But I could tell you a funny story about that. One day we had the old telephone, the dial-up telephone, that you used to use at a ground. So you'd drive to the ground, and this was at the ground at Altona one day, and Altona was in the Premier League, and I drive out there, a couple of hours before the broadcast was about to start, and unload my car with all the equipment. There was no, production staff. I did everything myself, and dial in and try and find the phone line. And there's a dead silence. There's no phone line connected. And I thought, no, they haven't paid their phone bill. So I ran over to the other side of the ground and got the treasurer and said, what's happening here? There's no phone line. He said, oh yeah, that's right. Telstra cut our line during the week because of some issue, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, oh, dear, we're about to go on air in an hour. So I drive to the next closest ground, which was Sunshine. So from Altona to Sunshine is only about a 10, 15-minute drive. And I rock up to Sunshine, and we did the broadcast from Sunshine. Luckily, they were playing a home game there. So they were some of the fun, things that you had to scramble to do. Similar at Heidelberg one night, the press box wasn't working, so literally called the game from behind the goals. We plugged in the equipment from the canteen and we were sitting basically outside the canteen in my car commentating the game. So they're the lengths we went to make sure we got on air, and you learn from all of those experiences, and some good fun times.
And during your time in Australian football, we often see you on the sidelines, which entails interviewing players. Now, not every player interview goes smoothly because, of course, there's always some language barriers. I know for me personally, I had a rough time interviewing someone who spoke only Russian and not much English. So do you have any stories of that where you've tried to interview a player and it was particularly difficult due to a language barrier?
Yeah, there's a few, and we've been blessed in the A-League to have some great international players with us. I suppose I had a little advantage with the Italian players, or those players who understood a little bit of Italian, but I suppose one famous one, if you like, and I think, if you search it up, it's on YouTube. It was Bruno Fornaroli when he first arrived in the A-League and was playing for Melbourne City. And I think his first game, he came on and scored a goal and did, fantastically well. And I had sort of met him a couple of times, and his English wasn't great, but he understood a bit of Italian and spoke, because he played in Italy. He played for Sampdoria. So I said to him before the game, if you score and if you do something fantastic, we really want to interview you after the game. And he said, no, I can't do it in English. I said, don't worry. If you get stuck, we'll break out into Italian. And that's what happened. So that was a bit of fun. We persevered a little bit in English, but it didn't work. So he just mid-sentence started speaking in Italian. And I had to translate live on air in English. So that was one of the fun ones.
And you've worn many hats in your journalist career. As we know, you've done the sideline commentary. You've also done commentary in the booth. Podcasts, you've done pretty much everything. So do you have a preference of what you prefer to do, or are you just happy to do sort of everything journalist-wise?
Yeah, I love being involved in the game, and I consider myself lucky and grateful for every opportunity that comes my way. So I started out commentating games on radio, and was lucky enough to call the first 3 seasons of the A-League on SEN, a Melbourne station, which is now also in Sydney and in other states. And with Paul Trimboli, who was a legend of the game and still involved in the game. And Trimmers and I became very close friends after working closely for that period of time. And the excitement of live radio commentary really is hard to beat, because with radio, it's quite a different discipline to television, because television, the picture tells the story. So you really have to be mindful of what you're saying and let the pictures almost tell the viewer what's happening, and you add to that when necessary and not overdo it. So there's a very different discipline to commentating on television than it is on radio, because with radio you have to explain every single thing, what's happening, where the ball is, what the crowd's doing, what the players' body language is like, all those sorts of things, what time of the game it is, because people can't see that, what the score is. People are tuning in and out, so you remind people every few minutes about what's happening. So yeah, a very different thing to commentating on television, as you said. So I was thrown in front of the camera at Fox, and that was in season 4 of the A-League, and was so nervous for probably the first season, because it was something that was quite new to me, live television. That people talk about, taking drugs. Well, this is a natural adrenaline drug that, you can't top. You finish a game, your players would finish up on a high, but so would you as a broadcaster. It's a natural adrenaline that, it really is hard to top, and anything can happen, anything goes on live television. So there are so many variables that you have to be aware of. So I'm banging on here, but I think you can sort of tell that, I love all of it. I love doing every role that I've been happy enough and lucky enough to be given the opportunity to do. So it's all good fun. But yeah, commentating a game is a lot of work. It's a lot of research, and it's not just turning up on a Sunday and telling people that, player A gets the ball, passes to player B. It's hours and hours and hours of research, talking to people during the week, talking to players, talking to coaches to get a backstory as well. So, and understanding the stats and all those sorts of things, being across all of those things takes a lot of preparation.
One of the most amazing things I've personally ever seen was one of the best commentators in the world, Simon Hill, posted his notes from, I think it was the 2006 World Cup, and it was just a book full of all these facts and stats about every single player. So as you mentioned, a lot of research does go into it, but just where do you find this research for certain players when you're doing a game where it's not, for example, 2 well-known teams like a Real Madrid or Barcelona, something like the FFA Cup, for example, where professional players and then semi-pro players, just how do you get some of this information?
You go straight to the source. I think that's the best way to do it. So an FFA Cup game is what a wonderful competition that's been, and I've been covering that for a few years now. And you go to the club. You if you haven't been commentating NPL games, and a lot of commentators that are working on FFA Cup have come from NPL commentary, and that's a big advantage. But if I know that I'm commentating Hume versus Port, which is an FFA Cup game coming up soon, on Channel 10, then I would make sure, well, at the moment we can't go and watch them play because the competitions are suspended and over, but I'd go to training, I'd talk to the players. If I can't get to training, I'd make sure I'd interview a coach or a player or a president and get as much information I can about the club, about the players, about their past results. So yeah, going straight to the source is the best way to do that. And sometimes you might be covering the Asian Champions League as an example, and you have to commentate a game with players from Gamba, Osaka in it. So again, that's you can find information about those players on the internet, but speaking to the club or speaking to a media representative at the club is the best way to garner that information.
And you touched on something a little bit earlier. When you were first thrown in front of that live camera that, being put on TV, you mentioned how nervous you were for pretty much the whole first season. I know sometimes players have weird pre-match superstitions and rituals they go through before they do a match. So as a presenter, do you have anything similar, or do you just kind of go with it?
Yeah. No rituals as such. I think it's just being well prepared, and just like players, if you're not well prepared, if you turn up to a game not prepared, then you won't perform at your best. And I think it's similar as a broadcaster. And I think one of the things I learned, if you're doing a sideline position role and you have to do a piece to camera, the live piece to camera was always the thing that I did very early on, and was most confronting to me, because people can see you, and it's very you feel naked in front of the camera. They can see everything about you, the expression on your face, whether you're frowning, whether you're smiling, all those things, and then they're listening to what you're saying as well. But if you don't look confident and you don't look like you know what you're talking about, people will see right through you. If you stutter, if you're unsure of what you're going to say, if you're unsure of a question you're going to ask, and it's happened, right? Because it's live TV, so those things do happen. But once you're prepared, and if you're best prepared, then you're less likely to make those mistakes. And I think another thing that I learned over the journey was not to read a script, right? Is understand, really prepare what you're going to say in sort of dot point form, if you like, because if you know your content, then you'll deliver it in the most natural way possible. If you've prepared a script and you're trying to memorize it word for word, then you're more likely to trip up.
And as a presenter, commentator, what have you, you would have talked to a lot of footballers over the years. Have you ever had a moment where you've met a footballer, interviewed a footballer, and you've gotten absolutely starstruck, or does that not happen to you at all?
Sometimes you pinch yourself after interviewing players, but you're in the moment and you're a professional. So I think you get the job done. So players like Cristiano Ronaldo, he was at the MCG for Real Madrid in a pre-season game. He's there, looking at me, wanting to get back into the change rooms, but I'm waiting for an ad break so I can interview him, and I'm trying to tell him that he has to wait, be patient. And I'm starstruck, but I'm in the moment. I'm doing the job. I followed Juventus in Italy, so Juventus has been here a few times, and Alessandro Del Piero was here, and I was lucky enough to do the first sit-down interview with him, a one-on-one interview for Fox when he on the day he arrived in Australia. So that was a big moment, because it wasn't just a 2-minute interview. We sat down for an hour and we had a really in-depth conversation. Steven Gerrard, at the MCG in front of 100,000 people. They're big moments, and they're moments you want to get right. So you sort of got to feel the moment and just, I suppose, pretend it's another interview. And then I suppose you can look back afterwards and then sort of appreciate, that moment. But try not to get starstruck when you're doing it because, you have to treat it just as another interview.
So during this year's NRL Grand Final, Jonathan Thurston, who's a relatively new, presenter commentator, made a bit of a mistake where he forgot to hand the microphone to the player he was interviewing, realised about halfway through. And Jason Pine, who's a commentator in the A-League from New Zealand, started this thread, which I thought was absolutely wonderful, in solidarity with Jonathan Thurston. A bunch of commentators, presenters, journalists were all sharing stories of similar mistakes they made to kind of show that, they are human. His example was that he was calling a player by the wrong name for the whole match. So for you personally on that theme, what was your moment like that?
There were two. There were two that stick out in my memory, and thanks to YouTube, I think they probably still exist somewhere. So you can look them up. Mark Bridge was playing for Western Sydney and against one of the Melbourne teams now, and he had been injured in the lead up to this game and missed quite a few games. And one of my questions was something about him still being injured and how does his body feel. Now that he came on as a sub tonight, is he feeling like he could play the full game? And he looked at me and he just said, I started the game tonight. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just did that. But you have to keep going. And I just looked at him and I said, you're right, I'm sorry. And I just asked the next question. So that was a really, bombshell moment for me. I was like, you feel like you dig a hole, and how far deep can I sink into Amy Park? And then there was another one as a commentator. I was commentating a game for Fox in the early years of the A-League, probably, season 4 or season 5. And Massimo Madoka was playing for Brisbane Roar at the time. And I was calling the game. I was sitting in the back of Suncorp Stadium, 100 rows back from the action. That's my excuse anyway. And you sometimes you see the play unfold, and you sort of back yourself to scream out the player's name if they're going to have a shot on goal. And the ball rebounded outside the area. And for some reason, I thought it was Madoka because you couldn't see the number as he was taking the shot. And I've gone for it. I've said, Madoka. And it actually goes in and he scores. But it wasn't Massimo Madoka. So as soon as he's hit it and it's hit the back of the net, he turns around and I think it was Ivan Franjic. And then you sort of have to correct yourself on air. But it's that moment, it's like, oh, damn, like I took a gamble and I got it wrong. So, yeah, they're probably the two that stick out.
And what is something that you wish the general public, like football fans in Australia, knew about your profession, what you do?
Wow, it's very competitive, and so it should be. I mean, I think it's a wonderful profession, and there are a lot of people that would love to be in my shoes. So I'm very grateful for that. As I said earlier, I think I'd wish that people weren't so critical of everyone in our profession. And, social media plays a big part in that. I've seen a lot of my colleagues go through a lot of pain and suffering because of things that are thrown at them, especially on social media. So I'd call for a little bit more understanding of what we do. Sure, we're in the public domain and we put ourselves out there, so we're open to criticism. And I've been, pretty lucky in that regard. I'll cop it when I do something wrong. But look, I personally haven't had too much abuse hurled my way, but I've seen a lot over the years, and with the advent of social media and Twitter and other platforms, it can get quite nasty at times. And some of my colleagues have gone off social media for periods because of that. So I wish that, there would be some more understanding out there sometimes for people in our profession.
And you've had a very storied career so far, but looking into the future for you personally, what are your goals? What are you hoping to achieve? And just what can we expect to see from Michael Zappone in the future?
It's a really good question. I'd love to be involved in the game. I was at Fox for 10 years, and prior to that at SEN calling games. So, yeah, I've been involved with the A League ever since it started. So that's something that will continue. I think, and yeah, that I hope that it can go for some time. And I've been lucky enough to go to World Cups and Champions Leagues and all those sorts of things. So those experiences are wonderful, and I hope that my wish is that the game continues to grow here in Australia, and we're lucky enough to be one of the voices that can help share the love and joy for our game in Australia. And where we always battle in Australia to bring our game forward, and that's my constant. I suppose, objective is to fight for our game, to give our game a voice. And so many people that do what I do have done such a great job of promoting our game and talking about the virtues of our game in a very competitive landscape. We know there are other sports that dominate, and we see ourselves as, I suppose, voices for our game in Australia, and we do as much as we can to highlight why our game's great, and we'd love to see it grow even further. And we've got some wonderful opportunities for that to occur next year, of course, leading to the Women's World Cup and continued growth of the A League. And I'd love to see more teams in the A League over the next few years. I think there's opportunity there, and the free-to-air exposure should increase with Channel 10 coming on board, which is great. So, yeah, continued exposure for our game would be great, and hopefully we can be part of that.
Well, that was one of the best answers to that question I've ever heard. But thank you so much for joining me today, Michael. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been a pleasure, and thank you for inviting me. And yeah, it's anytime.
Tonight, Michael, how'd you think you went? Yeah, okay. I think I did well.
Thank you for watching. This video is sponsored by Arrow Sport. Go to the link in the description, and the friendly team at Arrow Sport will help you create your own football dream jersey. Whether it's starting from scratch or using one of their many templates on their website, creating a jersey with Arrow Sports is easy, and prices start from just $50. Go to www.arrowsport.com.au and make your football kit dreams become a reality.